So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books, but because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination. They opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this. It saved me from having a single story of what books are.
The manipulation of the image of the Black woman is conducive to her oppression. Throughout American history, recurring images meant to make Black women seem inferior have circulated in the media and aided in the spread of misconceptions about them. These misconceptions generated by media representation and propaganda have real-life consequences for Black women. Misrepresentation plays a role in the way that Black women are treated by the institutions and people that they find themselves amongst. It also shapes the way they see themselves and determine their own worth. To understand the way in which misrepresentation affects Black women, it is useful to analyze the various stereotypes that are placed upon them, and one of them being the stereotype of the savage, one that dates back to colonial times. The savage stereotype character usually comes out of somewhere in Africa. She is commonly given animal-like characteristics and hypersexualized features. Her storyline is heavily exoticized, like that of Vixen's. Vixen, or Mari Jiwe McCabe, was raised in the fictional African nation of Zambezi. She uses the Tantu totem to access the Earth's morphogenetic field and can channel the abilities of any animal. By placing the story's origin in a fictional African nation, the comic gives readers a false image of Africa and the people that live there. The story portrays Africa as a mystical and primitive land. Unlike white DC heroes, Vixen's powers are derived from voodoo magic, something commonly regarded as inferior to Western medicine and religion. By presenting one of the few Black female characters in comics with stereotypes, writers are depicting Africa and women of African descent as dark, mystical, and animal-like to a white readership. This representation provides very little insight to the complex history and culture of people of African descent and imposes untrue stereotypes upon these people in real life. The close association of animals with these characters is also toxic to the perception of Black women. During colonial times, in order to justify the rape and sexual exploitation of Black women, slave owners and settlers would depict Black women as sexually primitive animals who enjoyed being used as sex objects. Vixen is commonly featured alongside a lion, and so are many other Black women in comics. While feral cats and other animals alongside men such as Spider-Man, Batman, and Black Panther are symbols of power, these animals alongside Black women have strong sexual connotations. On the covers of these male comics, heroes are depicted standing tall with a heroic stature. Vixen is often featured in the fashion of a centerfold model opposed to her male counterparts. She is depicted in tight clothing with her curves heavily exaggerated. This emphasis on Vixen's body shape is reminiscent of the Western fetishization of Black women's bodies. We can see the detrimental effects of this objectification in the life of Sarah Barnum, a slave who was purchased and put on display as a sideshow attraction because of her abnormally large buttocks. Emphasizing the sexuality and voluptuous body characteristics of Black female characters puts Black femininity on display as something to be enjoyed by white men, the primary audience for comics. It does not, however, seek to do Black women justice in a truthful way. Vixen and many other comics use stereotypical and iconic images of Black women for economic gain. Black women are not only subject to exploitation and misrepresentation of their identities, but also lack of representation altogether. Only 30.9% of the DC Universe characters are women, and Black women represent a small percentage of them. As a form of resistance, Black artists are taking the representation of Black women into their own hands. In an attempt to represent Black women more realistically, artists like Marcus Prime are fighting stereotypes with art. Prime is an artist who started posting his drawings on Instagram and Twitter. He acquired a huge fan base because of his interesting representations of Black people. His work is comprised of drawings mostly of Black people, and he explores themes like Black love, Black excellence, Black families, the Black body, police brutality, and much more. A particularly interesting theme that he explores is the reimagination of typically white or male characters as Black women. In his book, Bruh, which stands for Black Renditions of Our Universal Heroes, this is the main theme he explores. It features a collection of drawings of characters from Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, One Punch Man, Steven Universe, and many others. In the preface of the book, Prime asks readers a series of questions. Would you be upset if you were expecting Superman and Superwoman showed up? Would you take Wolverine less seriously as a woman? What if Sleeping Beauty was a man, waiting for a woman to come rescue him with a kiss? Now let's add to that. What if these heroes were not only women, but Black women? What if Naruto had Bantu knots and full lips with chestnut brown skin? What if the Hulk was tall and powerful with strong Yoruba features and a 4-foot afro? Would it be so far-fetched to have more Pokemon trainers of color? In the preface, he also addresses the race change of the character April O'Neil from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He writes, "In the story, most of us are accustomed to the fact that she is a middle-aged white woman just trying to make it. One day, as I learned the history of Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird's characters, I found that in the original comics, April O'Neil was a woman of color. I wonder who approached whom and said, this story would be better if everyone was white. This is arguably one of the biggest media franchises in history. Could that success be achieved if April was Black? The subject matter would have changed dramatically, even in such a simple cartoon, adding depth and new directions for a story that could parallel the true evolution of America. But that's just my opinion." Prime's book challenges readers to question their understanding of Black women in comics, graphic fiction, and the world in general. His questions force readers to recognize their biases and brings light to the institutions that may have influenced these biases. His message is also meant to uplift and empower Black readers. To name one of many, Prime's rendition of the Powerpuff Girls does just that. In Prime's rendition, the girls have ankh symbols drawn on their foreheads, Afro puff ponytails, and a light tan complexion. Professor Utonium is featured wearing a beard, thick eyebrows, and a light tan complexion. In one of the pictures, Professor Utonium is doing one of the girls' hair. Historically, the hair of black women has been policed by white standards of beauty. Black women feel a constant pressure to be ashamed of their natural hair texture and are encouraged to perm or chemically treat their hair. Prime encourages young black girls to be patient with their hair by depicting a frustrated child getting her hair done by her patient and loving father. Hearts drawn around the family are meant to symbolize unity and love. Here, Prime is normalizing the struggle that black girls face with their hair. By presenting positive images that black women can relate to, Prime is filling the gap of positive and realistic representation of black women in media. On his website, Prime offers a description for another image in Bruh featuring the Powerpuff Girls. In the image, Professor Utonium is shown sitting in a love seat reading a book called Real Black History to the Girls. In a blog post, Prime titles the piece The Missing Ingredient. In the description, he says, "It's crazy that children are still being taught history that we know for a fact is wrong. It's crazy that so many things black people have contributed to this nation and planet will never be taught in any world history classes. It's mind-blowing that in this age we still have to hunt for the truth. We have to triple-check every source that we read just to be sure it hasn't been tainted. We have to educate our children. With so many lies being told, make sure you know the truth. Your future depends on it." Here, Prime is using his art to encourage black people to seek their own truth about their history and to be critical of the negative images that they are shown when studying history. He is also encouraging black families to read and learn together, something that black people are rarely depicted doing in mainstream media. Prime's work does, of course, have limitations. In an interview with Afropunk, Prime addresses critics calling him misogynist and fake deep. Some would say that Prime's use of nudity, underrepresentation of darker-skinned women, and lack of diversity in his drawings as body shape are problematic. In the field of art, black representation is scarce, but even more so for black women. In order to fully confront issues that black women face, it is crucial that more black women are encouraged to pursue art and be involved in creating mainstream media. Prime's work or any male's interpretation of the black woman's struggle could never do justice to the black woman's narrative. When analyzing her history and contemplating the countless efforts to silence and exploit her, one can only conclude that black womanhood has been targeted and is under attack. Historically, comic books have been complicit in this objectification of black women. In order to correct the widespread disenfranchisement of black women in the comic book industry, we must encourage young black girls to imagine themselves outside of the stereotypes that they combat from birth. We must encourage black girls to write stories where people that look like them are successful, strong, powerful, and independent, and above all, realistic.